before we get to that, April, the recording is still fine.
Okay. Yep.
Suggestion for the neuroqueer typical. Are you familiar with The Kissing of Kissing by Hannah
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes,
Okay.
that's one of the poets we are investigating next time. I'm excited. If you have any other poet suggestions, though, we're definitely down for that.
They were our
Actually,
recent favorite.
what does neuroqueer mean?
We're going to talk about that. It's actually a newly coined term that is the intersection of queerness and
Neurodivergent?
neurodivergence. And I'm still kind of learning what it is, even though I have some experience myself. But so that's kind of the goal. We're going to read poets who identify that way, and we're going to talk about neuroqueer theory that was actually created by a professor. And we're going to talk to somebody who was the leader at a recent conference in Boston, who gave a presentation on that. So I think it will be really interesting, and I've never heard that topic covered before. But today's topic is how to make a poetry book, and Adam Stone and Valerie Loveland have joined us. So I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. I should do an intro because some people I don't know. Hi, my name is March, and I'm just facilitating. I use they, she pronouns. I'm going to pass to Adam.
Hey, I'm Adam Stone. I've been involved in the Boston spoken word and poetry scenes since like the mid 90s. And I have a very, very small press with just like handmade distribution that right now is kind of like a safe way to go to get your book out into the wilderness. And I'll be talking about putting books together for yourself and other people and putting together anthologies and how to do that and find artwork and stuff and make it an affordable thing to get your work out into the world.
Great, thank you. Valerie, did you want to do any intro?
Sure. I live in New Jersey right now. I lived in Boston for a while and a couple other poetry places that had a lot going on with poetry. The I want to mention that this is my fourth book, and honestly, it's the only one that I'm actually like really happy with. And two of the books were an actual nightmare scenario where my editor would take people's money and not send them the book. So I really it it really messed me up to think like someone was doing something nice and not getting it, and are they going to give up on poetry forever, that kind of stuff. So I don't know if I'm ever going to send anything out a different way ever at this point. I mean, if somebody asks me or something, I might send them a manuscript. And I do like doing one poem at a time, sending things out, but this has been really great anyway.
Yeah, I think part of what draws me to want to ask you all so many questions about the process with Crooked Treehouse Press, not only because the work is incredible, but also because the way that you found to do it is very much different, I think, and something that we could really learn from. So we want to ask you all like lots of questions. I just wanted to lay the kind of ground expectation here is like just interrupt anytime, ask questions anytime, right? So it's very DIY. I think we wanted to start with Adam, if you could talk a little bit about how you created a press, how you created a website. You have such an amazing presence online because you have podcasts, you have books for sale, you have blogs, you review different books, you have writing prompts. I mean, it's a whole poetry world on your website. And so can you just tell us a little bit about how you developed that?
It basically started when I was in college. I was part of a group of friends who put out like the annual college poetry collection, and it had been not great the last few years before we took it over because the people who were really excited about it had all graduated. So we took it over, and it still like I can't say it was great, but like we were pretty devoted to putting stuff together, and we enjoyed doing layouts. And so we started putting together zines. And once we started putting together zines, that's what actually drove me to go out and find poetry slams, as a place to like find people to submit, and also a place to kind of sell them. And we had a press together that was called Son of Words Press for a few years. It got out of hand in that like we weren't communicating very well, so we would like print people's poetry, and like the whole thing was you got 3 contributors copies, and we didn't communicate well, so it would be like, oh, we gave contributors copies to everyone, and it turns out like all 3 of us had given contributors copies to
Uh-huh.
one poet and forgotten about another one. It kind of got out of hand. So over the years I kind of decided to do my own thing, and it was initially just a way to get my own poetry out there and like poetry of friends. And then specifically in a little bit before 2012, I was talking with Simone Beaubien, who used to run the Cantabs Boston Poetry Slam, about putting together an anthology. Um, and so I was like, okay, I have to learn a way to do that. And at the time, there was a press at Harvard Bookstore where they had Gutenberg Press, which is they can basically print a book at a time. It's really affordable. Quality wasn't good.
Okay.
So we put out the first anthology through that. It was a nightmare. They were not good at getting things on time. They were not good with money. I vowed never to do it again. And another poet in the Boston Poetry Slam scene recommended 48-hour books, which is how I decided to put together the next Cantab anthology and my own books. And I love their work, and I'm still using them. Um, they're a good resource for actually publishing books. Like you have to do the layout yourself. They do offer layout services. I've never used them. Um, but if you are comfortable laying out your own book or laying out an anthology and getting cover art and everything, you send it to them and you get to choose. And I'll show you this later on. You get to choose the quality of paper, quality of cover. Um, they help you with making sure your cover design exactly fits with like spine of a book if you choose to use book with a hardbound or paperback spine. They're really good with it. The quality of their work has always been amazing. And anytime I've had a problem with them not getting stuff done on time, it's been my fault. And I'm okay. Like I like that I can be like, oh, this is taking longer than usual. Oh, I missed a step. Okay. It's never been their fault. They've always been really good to me. And they've always been good to people I've worked with as well. So in 2021-ish, I put together a group called Someday I Will Learn to Love Writing Poetry, which Valerie is a part of, Sue Savoy is a part of, Suzanne Kittredge has been there a couple of times. Um, and it's a group of people who want to put out poetry collections, who don't want to have to deal with sending things out for contests or for companies that, every year put out 10 to 20 books. There's no time frame for this. It's a group of people who are like, I would like to put out a book. And if it takes me 3 or 4 years, it takes me 3 or 4 years. If I want to put out a book a year, I can do that too. Um, and so far we've put out a couple of like uh we put out one PDF anthology, Valerie's book, and Terry Blade has put out a book and is working on their second one. And yeah, one of the things I'll be showing tonight are the variety of different books that we put out to kind of give you an idea. um, and I will try and touch on cost because that's also important.
Could you also talk about how you lay out a book?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
programs and stuff like that?
So Publisher is the program that I've used predominantly for the last like 25 years, but it's going to be Office Libre soon. Um, but it's both of them offer you the ability to set something up with what's called book layout. So if you've ever tried to put out a book with like Microsoft Word, I don't know if this has changed recently, but printed out, you used to have to do like first page, last page, second page, second to last page, third page, and that can get messy. Like one mistake and your entire manuscript is just borked, and you pretty much have to start over. So with like Publisher and Libre, you just have what's called book format, and you just put things out in order, page 1 to 48, 1 to 200, whatever it is, and it keeps track of like how to print it out and make it look like a book. Usually programs like that, you can set up how you want the margins to look so that your text isn't running all the way to the end of the page or all the way into the gutter or all the way to the top. Most of them have automatic page numbering systems. So you don't have to go on every page and do this is page 1, this is page 2. This is, you just put like usually a number sign in a little box and it automatically generates across the pages, and you can block out, let's say you've got like a chapter section and you don't want to see a page number on it, you can block it out. So for example, let me see, I'll just show one of the things that I worked on recently. Oops. March, can you make it so that I can share the screen real quick? Thank you. So this is an anthology of writing prompts that I put out last month when I was a bartender at the Cantab Lounge. I used to do a prompt every week for poets to follow at their own leisure. It wasn't like, you have a week to write these poems. Like every week I'd offer a new prompt, and over the next few months, usually people would pop in with their own work. And I still do prompts. I'm trying to do one a day for 2024, and I'm a little behind, but not much. But you can see these like these blue lines right here. These are the margins, the little text boxes. You can make title fonts, regular fonts here. I do not have page numbers on this collection because it's just prompts, and I'm not sure that like people need to look up prompts. There's no table of contents for this particular book. Usually for poetry collection there is, but for this, these are just writing prompts. I tried to make everything so it kind of like some of the things are centered on the page. Things like that. So did you have any questions about this, March?
No, that's great. I think there's probably other options too, but Publisher seems like a really good way to not have to fold it awkwardly. Like I've made a lot of zines and mess up the pages. So I think that some people are using InDesign as well, but I think that's harder and you have to have some training.
I don't use InDesign specifically because I've had people use InDesign to make books for me maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, and they were people who used it professionally for their jobs, and they tried to put out poetry collections, and they would end up with either teeny tiny unreadable text or like these huge wide white margins, and in the center just this little bit of text, not because they were incompetent or bad, but because InDesign is challenging to use, even if you've used it, like I said, professionally. So I have not used it specifically because I thought if they can't do things well, having used it as part of their job, I'm not super intuitive with that program. So I kept my distance from it.
And do you suggest waiting until it turns to Libra to learn it since the software is about to change?
You could use it. So Libra's been available for a long time. It's a free program, unlike like I have been paying per month for Publisher for the last few years. But Office Libre is free. It's a Linux program, but it works with Windows, and I believe there's a version that works with Macs. And I do recommend using it. I should have started using it as soon as I heard they were going to cancel Publisher. So yeah, I recommend using it on Libre. I have used Office Libre before, and it seemed very intuitive to me. Libre, Office Libre. I will find a link to that. Libre.
Also, if anybody else has questions, jump in anytime.
Yeah.
Curious how you created the ability for people to buy these books on the website, because so far we know kind of the software for creating the book, and we know 48-hour books is the recommendation for the company. And then I know a little bit about kind of putting together a website. I'm using just WordPress, but if you have other suggestions for that, and then also how you kind of set up selling the books that way.
Sure. I use Weebly. I have no aversion to WordPress. It's just not what I've used. Someone recommended Weebly at one time, and that's where I've paid my money and put my website up, and it's a hassle to move it off, so I've just left it there. But it's a website that I pay for. They give you the option to make a storefront. You don't have to have a business account with them to have a storefront, as long as you're selling, like, I don't know what the limit is on products, but I haven't even come close to reaching it. Let me pop my page up here. Yeah. So Crooked Treehouse Press is we got the name because of a house that I lived in for a number of years in Cambridge, where literally everything moved towards the center. So if you dropped a coin anywhere in the house, it would be at the center of the house before it stopped. That's where the name comes from. So I made it a website initially for blogging. And then when I needed a place to sell physical copies of the book, I decided to sell them here. I also have Patreon, where I sell PDF versions, because Patreon offers a service where you can sell files, but you can't sell physical material as easily in their storefront. With Weebly, it's pretty easy to set up, to get graphics, to come up with a decent price range, so that you can kind of factor in, like, this is how much money it costs me to make this book. This is how much money it's going to cost me to ship to people. So what do I need to make? Like, am I trying to make money on this? Do I double the price, or am I just trying to get this out in people's hands? And if it costs me $3 to make, I'm just charging $4. Stuff like that. They set up everything. It is through both Square now owns Weebly, so it's through Square, and they do also do Venmo, so that people can look at my website, can click on, oh, there's Valerie's book. I'd really like that. I'll click on the purchase button. And then you just add it to the cart, and you can check right out. I'm not going to do that because I already own Valerie's book, and it's awesome. But I'm not going to pay myself money today for that and then have to pay Valerie. Um, but yeah, I found it really easy to work with Weebly to set this up. Haven't needed any technical help with the storefront so far. Fingers crossed I won't. Elizabeth, you had a question?
Yeah, is this like a business website, or is it just a regular Weebly website?
This is a personal Weebly website.
Okay, so it comes with
Um,
essentially like e-commerce included, is what it looks like.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a free website. I do pay for it, but I pay for the personal
Yeah, okay.
profile. I did used to work for a company, and this is how I learned to set up the storefront. I did work for a company that had a Weebly website that was a business website that had a storefront, and that's where I kind of learned how to do it. But yeah, this is just personal because I'm not making the kind of money where I should be paying for a business account. Like, I'm not sending out 10 copies, 10 books every day. Like, no, it's a reasonable expectation that, like, I might sell 2 or 3 books a week, and then maybe there'll be weeks where I don't sell any.
Do you know, is it a different cost for personal and business websites? And is there some like metric by which they will determine if you should be paying for a business or a personal?
No, I think it's a limit on how you set up your website and how many items you have in your storefront. Like,
Mhm.
I don't think they have a metric for how much like quantity of things you're selling.
Mhm.
If you're just selling 5 different titles of books, they're not going to come after you because you're selling too many copies of those 5 books. But if you want to put up a website that sells, clothes in different sizes, plus books, plus food, plus, that's when they start to get into the business page. So if you're just using it to sell poetry or prose collections, unless you're somehow doing Penguin Random House numbers as far as quantities of books, like, you're not going to have to get a business account because it is significantly more expensive for a business account. I don't remember the numbers because I haven't had to look at it for a few years, but when I was working for a company that was like, what should we use? And I was like, oh, I use Weebly. And they were like, let's just do that. And I was like, okay, and we'll set up a business account. I looked at the number and I was like, oh, I could never afford that. Like, it would be totally non-cost effective for me to have set that up.
How do you do copywriting of the book?
So because I'm doing the Someday I Will Learn to Love Writing Poetry group, I'm letting people choose how they would like to use copyright. Because a lot of people right now, I'm trying to think, for Valerie's book, we ended up using, okay, regular copyright, but we were talking about, let's see if I can remember the different options for copyright. Because there are a lot of alternatives right now to actual copywriting. Creative Commons licenses. If you choose to look that up, Creative Commons licenses have a variety of basically copyright information where you can set, like, okay, anyone has permission to, like, print parts of this book for educational purposes, or, oh, anyone can use this material as long as they're not making money out of it. And then there's somewhere like, okay, no one is allowed to reprint anything that's in this book for any reason. There's like a whole, like, 7 levels, I think, of different types of Creative Commons licenses. And those are the most popular things I've seen in poetry and prose collections that are not on major presses. Because it does allow people to use your work again for, like, educational purposes or putting together workshops or things like that. You can just set it to be like, hey, anytime you're not making money off of my work, you're allowed to use it for what you need to use it for. So, but we used just plain copyright for Valerie's book. So no one's allowed to use it for anything except for Valerie. And that's another thing, like with Crooked Treehouse Press, I don't have the rights to anything but my own personal work. I'm never going to be the person that is like, one of my friends, who's been published quite a lot, has had a nightmare story the last few years where somebody bought her book to publish it and then got into a fight with her and decided they weren't going to not only were they not going to put her book out, they weren't going to give her her rights to her own book back. So her book just doesn't exist right now other than in on her computer when she can't sell it, and at his publishing house, which he's not going to publish it. So, like, she's getting lawyers, and that's just a
That's
nightmare. With Crooked
incredibly.
Treehouse Press. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
No,
Suzanne.
I was just gonna say that's outrageous.
Yeah, I've never had to deal with it. The worst I had to deal with was when I was doing zines, And it was in a poetry community that was, when I say pretty young, I don't mean like the age of the people involved was young. I mean like there were a lot of people new to poetry and publication. And the worst that's happened with me is I put out a zine and people got mad at me because they were like, well, since I sent that to you, I have a newer version that's better. And I was like, uh, that's not how that works. You sent me the work, I published it. Like, sorry. Um, I haven't had to deal with anybody mad about rights. And also because, like I said, uh, Terry and Valerie have put out books with Crooked Treehouse Press, and I went to 48 Hour Books and helped get the actual publication done for Valerie's book, but that's like it. It is Valerie's book. Like it is her property, it is her words. I'm not gonna like take poems out of it and use them for my own personal projects or like print out copies on the side and like sell them out of my house while she's not looking.
So can I
Adam,
just come back to, sorry, can I just come back to the copyright question? So in that case, because oftentimes you'll see under traditional copyright that the publisher has the copyright, not the author. So in this case, it would be the author has the copyright. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's worded that way. It does say, oh no, it doesn't. So for Valerie's book, I just took Crooked Treehouse Press out of the copyright information. Like with my own books, I'll say copyright Adam Stone and Crooked Treehouse Press. But for Valerie's book, all I put was copyright by Valerie Loveland. Because again, it's her work. I don't, I want it in the fact that I want to read it. But I don't want ownership of someone else's work.
and Adam, have you been doing the layout for all the books, or some of the writers chosen to do their own layout?
With Valerie's stuff, I just worked on I believe I just refonted it.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the case? Yeah.
Yeah, you
Uh,
also I think you did for those who don't know, my poems are like a real weird shape. Yeah, they're squares. They're not like the usual rectangles. So Adam, I think you did something with layout having to do with that too, because like you made the page size and stuff like that, if I'm remembering right.
yeah, I did. I did look at like Valerie has a particular layout for her poetry, which I love. So I had to like paste everything into the program and then had to go in and correct and make sure everything lined up exactly the way it lined up with Valerie's stuff. But I didn't reimagine it or reformat it like, oh, I don't like the way this looks, I'm changing that. But I sat down and was like, okay, Valerie's line next goes here. I have to make sure it does that in the book as well. Because format is really important. I also have long lines that tend to dangle. So I am very particular about making sure that I'm doing the visual representation that the writer wants, as opposed to what I like. It just so happens that I really like the way Valerie work looks on the page too. But I
I feel
wouldn't force. Oh, go ahead, Susanna.
Sorry. Yeah, so I feel like I know I went to a couple of the early meetings of Someday I'll Learn to Love Writing Poetry, and I feel like I don't even remember what we were doing. Were we doing more like prompts and writing? I feel like it sort of evolved into a little publishing collective after that. And is it something where you're kind of planning to keep it as this community, smallish community of people who are publishing things together and giving each other feedback? But
Yeah, it started off as a group that was just kind of meeting because we were all at a point where it was like, oh, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. Or like I'm really stressed out about poetry at the moment. And then we started talking about manuscripts, and like as a group, we decided like, hey, let's work together to put out the books that we want to put out. And like Valerie's manuscript, for example, existed before our group. Um, but it hadn't been published yet.
Yeah.
So we were able to get that done. But some other people are just like Sue is working on her MBTA poetry collection, which again, I'm very excited to see when that one's ready. And we put out a PDF. We did a reading in March advertise basically like, hey, these are the books that we're working on slash the books we've put out so far. It was sort of done in conjunction with the release of Valerie's book. Um, and yeah, that the PDF that we put together of is like a collection of poetry by all of us, and that sold pretty well right after the event. It was fun to put together too.
Adam, are you gonna go to small press poetry conventions? I know they have things like that where people can go and find out about smaller presses, or do you prefer just the online?
I'm going to eventually start at least approaching some of the local bookstores, in particular like Brolyer's, the Harvard bookstore. Portia O just opened up their own bookstore, so kind of approaching them about Porter Square Books about having like physical copies in local stores, and then I might uh get to the point where I'm doing small press conventions, but I would probably need someone else on board because that's not my main skill set. Yeah, paper cuts and JP, absolutely. Susanna, I love that store. But I'll get to that after we put out more books by other people. Because right now a majority of the books that I put out are either anthologies or work by me. And it's not my goal to be like, hey everybody, here's all of my books. Like, no, I want to get other people's books out there and so that it looks like a press and not like one dude trying to get his stuff into bookstores. Um, Talking about some of the anthologies, one of the first things that I put together for Crooked Tree House Press was this monster, and keep that going, 25 years of poetry, of Boston Poetry Slam at the Cantab Lounge. And this was initially a book that went from the founding of the Cantab in 1992 to 2012. And then I did another printing in 2017. This is adding the next 5 years. Um, and it was a monster. It took a long time to put together. Asking poets to send in their work is sometimes very challenging, even when you're like, hey, I would like you, person who wants to be published, to send me work that I can guarantee you we will use and publish exactly the way you want it with your formatting. It still took, I think, 2 years the first time to get everybody to send in enough stuff. Uh, and we did something fun with this collection where instead of biographies, before each poet's work, are usually 2 to 4 different recommendations or stories about that poet by other people in the book. And that was a lot of fun to put together as well. But yeah, this is many pages. And almost, yeah, it's about 450 page monster. There's a paperback version, and this is the hardcover version, which probably you can't get on a plane with. It's be viewed as a weapon. Um, but it was really fun to put together. We got the cover photographs are from the 2 different official photographers for Boston Poetry Slam from that era. So it was fun getting to highlight their art. And then we did a bunch of like fundraiser things so that we could afford to put it out. And that was like smaller collections of poetry, like the Cantab Speaks to Itself, which is poems about Boston Poetry Slam, or they were conversations where like one poet would write a poem and then someone would write a response to them, things like that. That was really fun to put together. And then Tips from the Bar. This is a collection of the prompts that I used to give every week, as well as poems written from those prompts by people at the Boston Poetry Slam. So those were fun to put together. And the last one, and this is something I don't know if I recommend other people doing because this was the hardest work I've ever had to do for a book, the Working Girls Bible, which is a giant hardcover. It's like the size of a comic book, but it's how many pages? It's almost 400 pages. And while you're like, wow, that's almost as big as the other book, like it contains everything that's in the other book and more because it's gigantic. but it also is full color photograph of different people on like photographic paper, um, of people over the years. And that was like the work of love to put together as like a major fundraising thing where people were spending like $200 to get a copy of this because it was not cheap to put together. But yeah, those are the different kind of anthologies that I did. The Boston Poetry Slam a number of years ago.
That's interesting that you moved from those anthologies to now you have books by individual poets. And I'm curious what it's like, what the process is like to come up with a collection of poems by one poet. Maybe Valerie could speak to this too, but I know Adam, you've published a lot of things like that as well of your own work, and kind of how you develop a theme or how you lay out the poems and what the process is like at the beginning and then as you go along.
So I don't tend to write to a theme. I know a lot of writers recommend, if you're putting poetry collections together like you do, uh, love poems, or you do poems on mental health, or you find a specific thing to run through all of your collection. The first book I put together, just someone asked me like, "Hey, why don't you put together all of the poems that you've done in Poetry Slam into a giant book?" And I was like, "Okay, how do I connect all of those poems?" And I turned it into a story narrative where there's a lot of fictional poems and a lot of non-fictional poems, and I tried to make them interrelated, and I would add poems to the manuscript that like bridged those poems, and then at the end there was like an epilogue where this is what happened to everyone you've encountered in all of the poems so far. um that was like my first book. My second book, which was The End of Lucidity, started as the night of the 2016 election, a series of Facebook posts about like what was going on around me as election results were coming in. And I was sitting in a store in Harvard Square, um, and then like winding different poems around how the election was going. Um, for the Someday I Would Love Writing Poetry group, like I said, Valerie already had a manuscript based on unsolved mysteries. Uh, so that was easy enough. Sue Savoy has been writing MBTA poems for a number of years, and like there's a bunch of different books I would love to see by Sue Savoy, but the MBTA one I think is the one that most of the people familiar with Sue's work from the Cantab would be like, I want all of her tea poems. Um, so that's the first one that we're working on. Um, a theme is not required. Terry Blade's first book doesn't have a specific theme that you can determine from looking at the cover or reading a description of the poems. There's a story there. If you read all the poems, like they do relate to each other, and you do see different elements of her life repeating in different poems. Um, Kelly Cooper will have a book out by us, and she writes a lot about science fiction. And so the more science fiction poems we heard by her, we were like, that's the book that we would want to read. So you should like write more science fiction if you can. And she has been, and it's been really fun. I'm looking forward to that book as well. Barrett Lebrecht, whom is not necessarily putting out something on Crooked Treehouse Press, but he's thinking about it, has a bunch of poems that if you've ever met Barrett, like they're very personal poems about his life, and then he also has a ton of poems about teaching. And so his book introduces you to him first as a human being, and then you see him as a teacher in the second half. And I thought that was a really cool approach to a manuscript. Um, I'm not a person who, again, thinks you have to write to a theme, but sometimes themes or ideas just present themselves. And you're like, I have 50 pages on this material. I would love to put them all in a book together.
I'm gonna jump in with a question. So you've talked a little bit about who some of the readers are for these, like other people who know the people publishing, but can you talk a little bit about who's the readership and how do you find new readers who aren't like regulars to the Cantab, for example, or people who already know about your press?
That's the difficult thing. Like for a lot of us, it was people that we knew from the Cantab was like our initial readership. I go out to a lot of, not as much since the pandemic, but I used to go out to a lot of different venues. Now I infrequently go to a bunch of like New England venues, um, and occasionally out of state. Uh, and that's been my thing is going to in-person events to get my readership up. I am not good at using social media to get people to read my books. So we were talking earlier, we had our Someday I Will Learn to Love Writing Poetry group tonight this week. And I was talking about the fact that like I deleted my Blue Sky account because I was like, I have no followers. I don't think I'm writing for anyone in particular there. So I'm just gonna go, I'm not gonna like focus on that. Um, for a while I had a Twitter when it was slightly less awful than it is now. And I had a lot of people who were following the weekly prompt. And it was easy to engage them with like, hey, here's some books that are available. Um, and they would talk to other people or tag other people on like, hey, check out these books. I'm not great with that. I'm better in person. I should probably find someone to do that and associate it with the press. Um, that hasn't been my goal, but that because social media is a great way to get your books out there. It's just not the way I am good at getting things out there. I'm better in person.
Yeah, but you have your website and you do use Discord and Facebook and
Yeah, like we've got meetings that we do on Discord. We do a weekly poetry event on Zoom. Um, and I'm running an event in Manchester, New Hampshire this Thursday, and then like the Monday after that I've got a reading in Worcester. So I'll bring all the books there. Now the one thing is I don't bring, say, like Valerie's book or Terry's book unless they contact me and are like, hey, I'm going to send you 10 books to sell, and I would be happy to do that. um, but I generally bring just my books and the anthologies to my readings. Um, I think it's probably bad that I'm bringing my books to the Box of Doom because the whole thing about the Box of Doom is it's a collection of terrible poetry. Um, but I am going to bring it just in hopes that people buy books.
yeah, and I think Susanna had an important comment in the chat that you have connections with poetry slam communities and communities kind of nationally, right? Or is it
Yeah,
internationally? I mean, because you've been in the poetry community for so long, so that's a part of what kind of makes the distribution more.
makes it a little easier that like I've that before the pandemic, but not because of the pandemic for very different reasons. The National Poetry Slam community became very different in 2019, and they lost the annual events. And the annual events were just a great place to go meet people who were doing similar work to you or work that you might enjoy. And it was good, like for networking and not in a horrible capitalist networking way, but in like, oh my God, we're all doing similar art things. And I really like what you're doing. And I would love to have a book by you. And some presses have come out of that. Button Poetry on YouTube and then the publication, like that's a poetry slam thing, very specifically came out of the National Poetry Slam movement. Less direct, but also related to poetry slam, like Write Bloody Press is made up mainly of people who went through poetry slam. Soft Skull, and there's another press out in California that I'm not thinking of. Um, aren't necessarily poetry slam presses, but a lot of their writers did go through poetry slam and got to know each other.
So
And that
something
is,
that I think you're really good at, Adam, and I think same for me is we're both like poetry citizens who do a lot of stuff, a lot of different stuff related to poetry. So we know, I know people from Pennsylvania because I was in a workshop for 20 years with people there. And there's people I know from the Saturday night thing, and there's you know, people from my college that I was in the literary magazine with. And, I write reviews for poetry books when I get them. And all of that equals people buying your book when it comes out. And I mean, some of this too is like, what are your goals besides like, yeah, I want to be a bestseller poetry thing? Like maybe that's not going to happen. But like my goal for this was I was hoping to make enough to pay for it. That was my goal. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't that hard. And I was expecting it like maybe in a couple of years I'll do it. But like because I know so many people and I participate in so many poetry things, there's end to end, I buy a lot of poetry books. So when the time comes and you're a poetry citizen, other poetry citizens will try to, do the same thing that you do for them.
Yeah, I know another thing you do, Valerie, that I've only started doing recently is like if you, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think if you find like a poet whose work you like, you will like cold friend request them on
Yeah.
Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So you're friends with people who you don't necessarily know in real life.
Yeah.
Because you admire their poetry. I don't know if
Yeah.
those people are necessarily the people that buy your poems, but I mean, buying your book, or
it's all sorts of things. Like basically the reason I feel okay doing that, and I know some people don't, is because old school blogging, you just follow someone, you don't have to request a thing, and you comment on their things now and then because they have an interesting conversation, and I try to be active with things. So yeah, I do add people. Some people will never say a single thing to me ever, and then other people, I don't know how, but like we got to be really close because they have similar sensibilities. Maybe their sense of humor is the same as me or whatever. But nobody writes a blog anymore. So if you want to know what a poet is thinking, famous or not, it's really through Facebook. And I think that's an understanding among poets because I almost always get added back. So it's like, I don't know, it's a little more closed. I wish we still had blogs because you could do long form thinking that way and that kind of thing. But I'll take Facebook. It's okay. So something else I want to say. So after my nightmare of a situation with my manuscript, my 2 books that came out, I was like, I'm gonna find a good press. This is like a really great thing. I'm really excited about it. I loved it. And I was sending it out and sending it out and sending it out, and I was getting lots of really great feedback like, you're gonna find a place for this soon. This is really great. This was a finalist, blah, 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 blah. No problem. It's gonna be, and it just kept getting more and more stale. And I was like starting to not like it anymore. And I almost like went on a tour before I had it come out, because if I go to a reading, I go to a ton of readings, I'm going to read what I'm excited about. And it was that. So then I see Adam just does it himself, sells way more than like, because of the nightmare situation with my old editor, I ended up seeing how many people bought my book because I was like, give me a list so I can check who actually got the book. Like I actually made a big deal about it. It wasn't that many. It wasn't that many. And half of them didn't get the book in the first place. But then I see Adam, he sells a ton of books, probably more books than anyone I know. And he publishes it before it's like a stale old thing that he doesn't care about anymore. And I was like, I'd love to be. I'm excited about this at the time, and it's out right now while I'm still in love with it. Instead of like, I didn't even look at this for a while. It took a long time because I actually like started hating the manuscript. And when it came out and I was looking through it, and I was like, how could I hate you? You're great. Like, what's so I would like to be in that situation every time now. Another thing, when I was like, should I just do it myself? This is scary. So many people were like, don't you dare. Like, you're gonna it's gonna look terrible and all this stuff. And speaking of cold contacting, I cold contacted my favorite poet, Sia Conrad, and said, what should I do? Do you ever self-publish? And they were like, yeah, I do it all. Who cares? Just get it out. Just send it out. Who cares? And between that and seeing like how Adam does things, and it just seemed really obvious and good. And once we started calling it a publishing collective, people were like, oh, that's great. Like, they were like, no, don't self-publish, don't do it. And it's the same exact thing. I'm like, poetry collective. They're like, oh, great. How wonderful.
And it really, like, I want to like stress how simple the process is, the way I was able to get books out like while I was still excited about them.
Yeah.
Like, I wrote a lot during the pandemic, not just because I was at home all the time, but for those who don't know me, I was on vacation about a year before the pandemic hit, and I got Legionnaire's disease in a hot tub and was in a coma for a couple of weeks, and like was trying to write about it and trying to write about other things. Uh, and then once the pandemic hit, nobody was going out and doing poetry. I was just doing online stuff. And then as we started to like get back to a place where I felt safe going out to venues, I was like, all of the books that I have now are a person who doesn't really exist anymore.
Mhm.
So I need to put out poetry that's very recent about my experiences to have something to sell. And how 48 Hour Books works, just really simply, is you send them your file. Like, here's my poetry collection. Here is my cover art. They'll tell you, like, okay, here's what you need to change about your cover art to make sure it fits with the spine. Like, here's the measurements you need to do. You do that yourself. You send it back to them, and they say, like, okay, are you sure there's nothing wrong with this book? You haven't made any typos. You haven't done anything, because once it's published, and you have to start all over again. You have to pay us for this, and then you'll have to pay us the same amount to republish something if you've done a typo. And you're like, no, I will live with whatever typos I put in the book. And it takes roughly a week to get to you, and you get to pick like matte covers, hard covers. Do you want like a slick cover? Do you want to do like words on the spine? Is it too small to do that? That's fine. You can still get like a spined book, so it looks nice on a bookshelf. And it takes like a couple weeks of the process to make the manuscript, to send it to them to print it, and for them to get it to you. And it's relatively affordable. You don't have to publish 1,000 books. Like there's a poet named Zork out of New York who published 1,000 books, 1,000 copies of his book in 1998, and he still has an entire gigantic storage unit filled with those books. If you want to print out 10 copies of a book at 48 Hour Books to give to your relatives, you can do that. And it costs just as much, maybe like slightly more than if you were to print out 100 copies of the book. The one bonus is anytime you do, pardon me, 100 copies of the book, they give you 25 copies for free. So 200 copies of the book, 50 copies for free. So like if you're out there thinking you're going to sell 500 copies of your book, go for it. That's not me. Valerie says I sell a lot of books, but like I'm not doing the numbers where I'd feel comfortable publishing more than 100 copies of the book, and knowing that those 125 copies now going to last me a couple years. Like,
And
you
if-
know, I'm not going to sell them out in a month. Maybe like a chapbook. Like I did a chapbook called Whales with Legs, and that was the first like post Homa book. And that one I sold mostly through the first printing in like a couple of months because I was doing a bunch of shows. But yeah, you can set the amount that you want. You can figure out a dollar amount you want to spend and like, okay, let's see how many copies of the book I can get for $200, $400. And it, you know, like I said, it's affordable. They don't do distribution that you have to deal with yourself. But right now, if you have not heard, it is a nightmare for small press distribution. Two of the three major small press distributors went under. And there's no solution yet for what that means for small presses. Um,
Yes,
so
exactly. So what you're doing, Adam, is the future, I think.
Yeah, me too.
so,
And
um,
if you do sell out of all your copies, getting a reprint pretty easy?
yeah, there's actually here, let me do a quick share screen again of 48-hour books. Da-da-da. This. Um, so this is like a list of different books that I've had printed by them. And see, there's a button right there that just says reorder. And you click on that, and reprint with changes basically means you have to start over. So you might as well just start over. But exact reprint, they already have everything on file. They don't purge them out of the system. Um, and it costs less the
Oh,
second time you go to print them because they've already done any editing and resizing work that they had to do. So literally all they have to do is just print it up again. And when I've done reprints, I've gotten them within 4 or 5 days.
Wow.
Like,
And can you adjust the quantity? Can you be like, well, I sold out of my 100 copies and now I just want 50 more or whatever?
Yep.
Nice.
yeah, you do any amount you want. And like they have right on their website here, like a price calculator, and you select like how much you want for binding, and it tells you like, oh, do you want case binding, which is a hardcover? That's going to cost an additional $10 than if you were to do a traditional perfect binding. And then they're like, okay, how big do you want the book? And they give you a bunch of sizes. Now you can do other sizes, but like this is a pretty good amount of standard sizes for publishing books. You enter how many pages you're going to put into it, and then you get to the quantity, and then they tell you like that's going to cost roughly this amount of money. And then they'll ask you like other smaller questions so that they can figure out like how much will it cost to ship the books to you depending on where you live, and things like that. But like this is the first page and it gives you a pretty good estimate of how much the books will cost you.
it's literally the only book I ever had that I was like, this actually looks great. Like my first book, I'm like, the editor made this pixelated thing. I don't really want to say anything because I'm grateful. And then the second one, like, was printed on the person's literally printed on the printer. This is the only one that I'm like, this is gorgeous. This is so nice. Like, I can't even like complain about anything with it. They do really nice work.
And part of that is because Valerie chose a cover, and I feel it's important to kind of advertise this to
Yeah,
um Unsplash.
it's wonderful. Like
Yeah.
I
So
got exactly what
Uns
I wanted.
and Valerie described Unsplash to people.
Yeah, so basically what I would say is it is photographers who put their pictures all on the site for people to use for free. You just have to credit them. And literally, I think I looked for the words unsolved mysteries and I looked for like weird or I don't know what just different things related to moods with my book and found multiple pictures that would have worked with my manuscript. And one
Yeah, so
picture is on the back and one picture is on the front. They're not the same artist. The colors go really well together. It looks like they were made for each other. And I did crop a little bit of it, and the inside the book, I have the people's, names, who, took the photos. It has a huge amount of photos.
for my own books, I try and work with artists just because I'm very lucky to have a lot of visual artists in my life. But seeing Valerie's cover, I was
Mhm.
like, oh, let me research Unsplash. And when we put our anthology together, I was able to do like every single poet, like their section head was a different picture that I'd gotten from Unsplash. And again,
Yeah.
it's free as long as you credit photographer.
Yeah, and literally the cover you made for that is what I'm going to use for my next book. Like, absolutely. I'm going to get that picture, name it the idea that you had to name it. So I gotta, make sure. Well, I guess you have the picture, so
Yeah, I can
we
just
know
send it
who
to
it
you.
is. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, so you got the picture from Unsplash, you
Yeah.
downloaded it and saved it, and then you uploaded it to Canva, and then you put
That's
it
what
in
I
the
did.
publisher.
Yeah, I used Canva to make a cover. The font on the front is the font that Canva had. I thought it looked good. And I think I downloaded it as a PDF or JPEG. I forget which one. And that is sent in, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, that is sent in separately from the manuscript itself, right?
Yeah, you send
Okay.
in a manuscript and then you send in file that is supposed to be the front and back cover. And if there's enough room, you can put the um, title and name of the author on the spine. I think it has to be 48 pages, maybe 52, before there's a font that can actually fit on the spine. So it wasn't for this one. This one it was too small.
Mm-mm. Um, another thing I want to say about like the collective, like Adam really helped me with a bunch of stuff with this, and other people in the collective looked over the manuscript for suggestions, issues, whatever. There's a couple people like Kelly. I was like, I just can't do it. This is too much for me. I can't make this table of contents. And Kelly sat with me and helped me with the table of contents. And Terry was like, what's your problem? Why aren't you doing this? And I was like, I'm afraid I'm gonna forget to put someone in the acknowledgments. And she sat down with me and was like, let's write this right now. And if you forget something, you forget something. So like it's like, and later I'm helping someone by looking through their thing or giving opinions for covers. Like, this one has a problem, you can't exactly read it, but this one's better. Just it's really nice having people with different strengths than you helping you, and then you can help them with theirs. It's been a really great experience.
We've lucked out that it's a really supportive group.
Yeah.
We don't have anyone in it that's like, I don't know, I don't think this is a good poem.
Yeah.
Um,
And they let you be you too, which I don't think you can always get in a press. Like, everyone there knows my work, knows what I'm hoping to do, and is like, we're gonna make this the best and most you that we can. Not like, does this fit with our vision of a press? It's not like that.
benefit of not having to work with distribution is I don't have to describe the press to anybody because it's just a press that puts out stuff by people who want to work together under the umbrella of Crooked Treehouse Press. So we don't have the same voice. That's fine. These books don't look the same. That's fine. Like, it's great that presses have voices and like Write Bloody for a while, for like 10 years, like you could tell book was a Write Bloody book. You're like, oh yeah, no, there's like a tone to it. Um, And I don't know that that's going to be the case with Crooked Treehouse Press, and I'm fine with that. I would rather get out books by people who aren't using other avenues, who want their books out there. I would much rather just have them out there than be like, do you think you could maybe write in this manner? Or I think you should resize your lines. Like we're a short line press. No, sonnets only.
Like there's no reason for us to do it the old way, and I came to the conclusion the only reason I was doing it, because I was doing all the press myself. I did the layout myself. The only reason was for me to get validation. And I was like, is my own validation enough of a reason to keep doing it this way? And you know what? If our way that we're talking about right now, that's not the only way either. It's like the way things are is it's a mess. It's toxic. No one's really happy with it. It's kind of dysfunctional. So I think it's worth trying something else.
I'm gonna
Like
ask a
find someone
question.
who's happy. Find someone who's happy with their press totally. Not a lot of people.
Just a quick so just to kind of understand the process really clearly. So it sounds like Valerie and Adam, the collaboration happens at the manuscript stage, right? And then like that's where the press comes in. And then Valerie, well, maybe you can describe like what part did you do with these collaborators, and then what part did you do with the 48-hour book? Like what what were you in charge of sending them, or who sent what to whom, or just very like operationally, how did it work?
I
Everybody's
think
different.
yeah, there's two ways. So like we do work on poems in the group as opposed to like manuscripts as well. Like Valerie and I will, you know, post a poem every week or so and just we'll discuss like what works and what doesn't work. But in the case of Unsolved Mysteries, like I said, it existed before we started this collaboration. There was already a manuscript.
Yeah.
So
And you get a lot of help. Like Susanna helped me with all my titles for the manuscript before this group even existed. I was like, my manuscripts suck. And can people help me look at this and see if there's anything like wrong? And she and a couple other people looked through the whole thing. She suggested great titles. There's like my favorite titles in the whole thing are from Susanna's suggestions. And it's like somebody else has a different suggestion. Like I picked the cover for mine. Terry, I think, picked the cover that Sue's probably going to use. I mean, my manuscript was in really good shape by the time I got it. This group formed, and from there, I said, "Hey, what do you guys think of this for the cover?" This is what I'm having a problem with. I can't make myself do this thing. It's really like emotionally like making me nervous, or like I suck at this. Can you help me with it? And then we kind of fill in each other's stuff. Adam helped me super much making it into a square instead of the trying to do things the normal shape way. And at the end of things, once I was like, all right, got this, got that, I think I have all the pieces, he sent it in for me. And he another thing, he solicited someone to write a foreword for it, which I never would have done. There's no way I would have asked people to help me like that. So that was like such a huge help. And it's hard to even think, because like if I start going down the list of the things that people helped me with, it was so many different like random parts of it. Like, I know you did more than that. Oh, you also got us the whole group. What are those codes called?
oh, ISBNs.
Yeah. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, how do you, well, I guess maybe that's
There's
a whole other.
yeah, there's a website you can go to where you can buy blocks of ISBNs, and it is cheap to buy in bulk, ridiculously expensive to buy them one or two at a time. So I bought like 100 for the press because you have to have an ISBN for a physical copy of the book. You have to have a different ISBN for like a PDF file. If you do an ebook, that also needs another ISBN number, things like that. So I bought 100 for the collective. And like I asked people if there's a particular number sequence they'd like in it, and then I look and I'm like, oh, I have that. That's over here. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was great. It was a really great experience, and like I wasn't used to like that kind of support. Like it's what we are getting and what we're giving each other is what we wanted from presses and not getting. You can't get that anymore. I mean, maybe someone famous can. I don't know.
There's no like risk of rejection because like yes, I dealt with 48-hour books, but Valerie paid them. This wasn't a
Yeah.
case of like I
Yeah.
paid X amount of money to 48-hour books and then charged Valerie this amount of money. Like, no, Valerie, like you own the books, you own the rights, you pay for the books. Like, I'm not making a profit off of your books. Um, that sort of thing. It is not again, it's not a business for me because I wouldn't make enough money to survive on that as a business.
I mean, that's the thing too. Like, I hate to be like this, but none of us are getting famous. You know, like success in poetry is not success.
The getting printed on like an actual small press that has small press distribution, like getting the money from them every once in a while, the residuals is nice. It's not paying your rent. It's not going to pay your utility bills. Now, if you just have your own book and you're selling it on your own and you're going to a lot of live events, it's probably not going to pay your rent. Certainly not if you live in Boston or New York City. But you might be able to pay your utility bills with it because you're getting the money directly and you don't have to give a percentage to the publisher, a percentage to the distributor, percentage to the editor. It's your work, you're getting all the money from it. And that was another thing that I took into consideration. That and I did recently send some stuff out to small press publishers and it got rejected. And I was initially irritated. And then I was like, wait, this just means I don't have to worry about like how long it's going to take them to put out the book. You know what? No, that's fine. I'll just do this myself.
Yeah. I mean, maybe people are judging me like behind my back about it or something, but like everyone has been like, the book is beautiful. And usually I send it to them and they're like, there's a problem, you know, previously. So it's only been good.
If anyone has any lingering questions, I know I'm an introvert. Sometimes I don't say anything for a long time and then I'm thinking all these thoughts. So if anybody has any questions, now's the time. We're gonna wrap up soon. Also, if there's anything we didn't ask you, Valerie or Adam, that you wanted to say, now's the time. And welcome, Michael. I think you came in a little bit later, but thank you for joining us as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry I'm so late. I'm out of town. I'm in New Orleans, and the time difference is extreme, and
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Well, thanks for joining us from
it's
afar.
like 7:15 here. So
Yeah, we're Eastern Standard Time. I think we have a question in the chat. Nancy is asking, what fonts are you using? Adam said different fonts for each book. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking right now to see what we used for. I think for Valerie's, we just did like Times New Roman for the actual text. I try and match things. I like fonts similar to Georgia, tend to be things that I go with. For the Cantab anthology, Linux Libertine was the font, and that's something that we bought. I don't have a problem using free fonts, but the person that I was working with on the anthology was like, I really want this font. And I was like, okay, I like the way it looks. That's cool. And she was like, we're going to have to pay for it. I was like, people should be paid for what they do, and people who make fonts for a living are people. Yes, let's send them some money. But often I'll use like Georgia or something that comes free with like the Microsoft publisher or Linux Libre.
Great. Well, unless we have any more questions, we can wrap up. I'm going to stop the recording now. Just want to thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you next time.